What is up, guys? Welcome to Juice Podcast. My name is Salman Ali at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter. Here joined by Rafael Barlowe, host of the NBA Big Board podcast and subsequent Substack newsletter. Rafael, how are you doing?
Doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So the last time you and I talked, you were an expectant father. Now you're officially a dad. How's that been for you, man?
It's been great. My son is 10 months now. He'll be 11 months in about 2 weeks. And then he turns one right in the middle of summer league. So I think I'm going to take him to Vegas so he can make his summer league debut. But he's been to games with me. He's been in the gym with me while I'm scouting and evaluating and filming prospects. So I think he's ready for summer league now.
He's ready for it. You think he's gonna play? Is he gonna play?
My son?
Yeah.
Maybe if they got a little halftime show with some crawling or whatever, I think he's ready for that.
Well, I meant more or less just basketball. Like you think he's interested in the
Oh,
game?
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's still young, but I mean, he's around it so much. I mean, there's
Mhm.
been a joke. I won't mention the guy's name, but there's been a joke that my son has been in the gym more than this supposedly elite talent evaluator that evaluates some of the top high school prospects. And so,
Right.
but no, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, he didn't win like the height lottery. I mean, I'm not too tall. I'm like 5'6", 5'7". My wife is probably like 5'6". So, I mean, he's not going to be a 7-footer or anything like that, or maybe not even be a wing. But I mean, I'm grooming him to hopefully one day just take over big board for me, or be a scout or a writer or something like that. So, my dream is for him to play, but I mean, realistically, just be like a great talent evaluator or a writer. So that's the goal.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hear you. I hear you. But it sounds like you're having a lot of fun.
Oh
Um,
man, it's a blast.
right. So let's start here. Kind of a dumb question, but I am kind of curious what you think. Like, let's take Victor Wembanyama out of it, because he is kind of an outlier. How strong is this draft class relative to the last couple years?
I think it's a good class. I think it's a class that teams will be able to find like good complementary pieces. The way I look at this draft is that even like the worst teams, whether it's Houston to Detroit, they have their dudes, right? They have their guys already in place. And so I think this draft teams are going to be able to find like the complementary pieces that you can surround next to, a Jalen Green and an Alperen Sengun, or even in Detroit's case, they have Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren. So I think you can find like that third wheel or fourth wheel, or that guy that, like I said, just complements the guys that they already have in place.
So in 2021, like the Rockets are very fortunate to get the second overall pick in what was considered to be like a four-man draft, like Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Jalen Suggs, and Jalen Green. Like that was like kind of like the four going into it, right?
Yeah.
And then last year, like they got the third overall pick in what was considered to be a three-man draft, right? Like Paolo Banchero, Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith. This year they have the fourth overall pick, and to be honest, I'm kind of stumped. I've watched a lot of these top guys a few times over. I'm having trouble answering this question. Like, is this like a two-man draft, like we were talking about at the beginning of the year, or did it become a three-man draft with Brandon Miller's college season? Like, or is that not giving someone like Eamon Thompson enough credit, and it's actually a four-man draft? Like, before we get into like tearing this off, like, what do you think of this?
Um, I mean, I'm not really big into saying it's going to be a whatever, simply because I mean, we'll just use the Rockets, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Alperen Sengun, what was he, 16? 16th pick?
Yes.
In a redraft, he's going significantly higher. And
Right.
I'd even say 5 years from now, because I think he can be a scaled down version of Nikola Jokic. I think even 5 years from now, he could be a top 5, 6, maybe even higher player in a redraft. So, just saying it is a one-man, two-man, three-man draft in the beginning, I just kind of stay away from those conversations in a sense, because we just never really know. And even, I mean, I think about, what was it, 14? They thought it was a three-man draft with Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker and Joel Embiid. Well, I mean, Wiggins has been an all-star.
Mm-hmm.
Jabari Parker's out the league. But Embiid is, he's an MVP. So, yeah, just kind of stay away from those. I think, 17 it was, who was it? Markelle Fultz, Lonzo Ball,
Right.
and Tatum. Well, only one of those guys has been an All-Star. So I just kind of stay away from those comparisons too
And
early.
I think Tatum wasn't even part of that conversation until he was actually drafted by the Celtics, right? Like it was before it was like a Fultz and Ball conversation, and then kind of
Yep.
yeah, it does work out like that. And even like we talked about that Jalen Green draft, like Scotty Barnes not part of that, like there's a
Yep. He was Rookie of the
yeah,
Year.
Franz Wagner. Like, there's a bunch of players that just, for whatever reason, they aren't considered in that class going into it, and then the games actually begin, we have to reevaluate. But I'm dumb. I still do think of it that way, just because like that's the way it seems to be talked about, and it's just an easier way for me to remember thinking out when I'm doing the research for this stuff. It's like, okay, these are the guys I really have to pay attention to. But I hear what you're saying. But I think you and I can safely assume that Victor Wembanyama is kind of in his tier of his own as a prospect, right? Like there's no one in that discussion.
Yep. Yeah,
So
definitely. But even then, just to kind of reiterate what you're saying, sorry to cut you off. If you go back, and I've done the research, if you go back to like 1990, right? There's only been a handful of years where the number one and number two pick hit as far as being an All-Stars. And one of those years was 2019 with Zion and Ja Morant. But other than that, I mean, we've had some years of, I think Hashim Thabit was number two, Derek Williams was number two. I mean, even like Fultz and Ball. I don't. I mean, there's still plenty of time for one of them to become an all-star, but I think it's highly unlikely both of those guys, or even one of them, becomes like a franchise guy. So that's why, this is a one-man, two-man draft. Just looking at the history, it's extremely rare that even if it's a three-man draft, that two out of those top three guys end up being like franchise guys.
right. So there's not really a discussion for number one, right? The Spurs are going to take Victor, right? As far as
Yep.
two
He
through
should have his
four
jerseys
go,
already printed out.
right? That's already done. People have probably already bought Victor Wembanyama jerseys, not through the NBA site, but somewhere else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, as far as two through four go, it's kind of an eye of the beholder thing from what I've seen. Like I think, in my opinion, the next tier break should come after Victor. I think that should be Scoot, but not a lot of people see it that way. Like, where do you stand on that? Like, who is your number two, and do you think anybody belongs in the same tier as a prospect with him?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like, and it's one of those things where, like, if you say Brandon Miller, then it turns into like anti-Scoot, and that's definitely not the
No.
case. I try to look at it in two different ways. All right, if you look at how Scoot played in that showcase game against Wembanyama, then you could say, oh man, maybe it's 1A, 1B, or there's not that big of a gap. And then Scoot got off to like a really, really good start in this G League season. I want to say like he scored like 25 or more, and maybe like 4 of his first 5 games or 5 of his first 6 games. But then in the second half of the season, the numbers like scaled back significantly. I mean, you can make a case and say he took his foot off the gas and so on. Unfortunately, or fortunately for him, is that if you take your foot off the gas in the G League and you're not as productive in the second half of the G League season, it's not as broadcasted as it is if it were like college basketball. And so I think if Scoot played college basketball and he had the second half of the season similar to the second half of the season in the G League, then I think people would be even a little bit more concerned. But I think Brandon Miller is very good. I think Scoot is going to be really good too. But the reason why I'm high on Brandon Miller, and I have been, and I've kind of jokingly mentioned it, but I mentioned that I thought that there's a chance for him to be the number 2 pick back in January, and I took so much heat and flack for it because at the time it was considered, so outlandish.
No, yeah.
But I think when you look at Brandon Miller, you see that he provides positional versatility. He can play the 3, and you may be able to close in lineups with him at the 4. We're talking about a guy that shot 40% from 3 on 7 attempts per game, all the way up until he got to the NCAA tournament. Now, he did have a historically bad NCAA tournament, but for the most of the season, he was the best player in college basketball, one of the best teams, and he is 6'9", can shoot. And I think there's more to his game than he was able to show because Alabama doesn't really allow mid-range shots, and to me that was like his greatest strength coming into the season. And I think he's an easier positional fit. And unfortunately for Scoot, the way the lottery results worked out is that San Antonio would have been an ideal fit for Scoot, to be honest with you. But Portland, Charlotte, those aren't the best fits for Scoot. But Brandon Miller can go and fit in right away with Charlotte. He can fit in with Portland. He can fit in with Houston. And so I think he has probably the easier projectable role or scalable role, while I think Scoot is best as the primary. And I think there's only a few teams that he would be the clear-cut primary ball handler in this draft.
How much did the ankle injury affect Scoot? Because like I'm with you. Like I did see like him taking his foot off the gas after those first few games in the G League, and I was confused as to why he was playing so poorly, particularly the shooting. The shooting numbers just like completely dipped off, and
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of the ankle injury, right? And then I found out about it like a week or two after I finished watching his games, and it made me kind of look back. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see why some of his play dropped off, particularly the shooting numbers. But like in your opinion, like how much is that? Like how much should we, put weight on that in terms of the ankle? Like did that noticeably impact his play, or was that just him, as you said, taking his foot off the gas?
I think it did, but I've talked to people around, the G League and that scouted, and they just felt like, in his opinion, he didn't really have much to prove. And I like the Ignite. I like, what they're doing as far as developing guys. But the one thing about the Ignite that kind of concerns me is even though the competition is better, you don't get the opportunity to watch guys play in big games where there's like an intense environment. You don't get a chance to watch guys play, on the road, like, in college basketball. You go to Fall Gallon Fieldhouse, or you go to like North Carolina. You got like these rivalries. And so I think because you don't have that, you don't get a chance to really watch guys play in like, the best environments. Now, on one hand, on the flip side is, everybody's bringing their best against the Ignite. But the Ignite don't even have pressure to win. And so that's something that I think you have to factor in. And so with all that being said, several people felt like Scoot didn't have anything to prove. He didn't have those big games, like a matchup with another guy that is projected as a lottery pick and so on. And so they felt like more so it was the ankles, taking his foot off the gas, and then I think he had like a nasal fracture, and I think that kind of impacted it too. So, yes, the ankle did play a role in it, but I think also the fact that there weren't those big games to get up for also.
Right. Yeah. You definitely saw like other prospects take their foot off the gas outside of college basketball. Like I remember watching some old Ben Simmons tape, and like he didn't seem to care. Like I mean,
Yeah.
and he was still in college. He was just at a different college. It was just like not a top tier program,
Yeah.
right? And it was like you saw some of that with like LaMelo Ball too. Like it's when you're not playing at one of those programs for some reason, there's like at that second half of the season mark, you see the play drop off. So yeah, I think it's possible that it is probably some sort of combination of the two. I think where I land on it is I think the shooting numbers are probably where it has the greatest impact. But in terms of like the motivation to play and stuff, that was definitely all on him. That's like something that he had control over, and he chose not to, really stamp himself at number 2.
And it's the total opposite of Victor, I wanted to add. So you look at Victor's situation, he was going number 1 regardless, but he's playing for his team to win the French League. He even played in like the cups for the national team. He still had to compete at a high level when he could have easily took his foot off the gas. Victor could have took his foot off the gas. He could have shut it down after the showcase when he had 35 and 37 points or something like that. And to me, that's a huge difference that's not really being talked about.
Yeah, I agree. So I really like both Brandon Miller and Amen Thompson as prospects. And to be honest, I kind of don't think the gap between the two is that wide. I think Miller has a safer floor because, like, to be a productive NBA player because of that shooting, right? That shooting is just so translatable and the size. But I feel like one could easily make the case that Amen has a higher ceiling because of the athleticism. Like, he's a crazy athlete and the playmaking ability. Like, I think he is probably the best passer in these top four prospects. Like, just from watching all these top four guys. Sometimes I used to think it was Scoot, but I watched a lot, even more, some more of Amen, and Amen has like the tricky passes, the passes that his teammates aren't ready for. Like, he throws like bullets, and like they like I always see teammates like dropping the ball when he throws them. It's just so fast, right? And that to me is like a sign of like advanced level playmaking. Like, just when your teammates aren't even ready, and that just shows like, yeah, you're ready for the next level, man. You're ready for like real NBA players to catch these passes. But yeah, that's kind of to me is like why I think he has a higher ceiling. But again, the Miller thing, I think you have to weigh that into account. Like, the shooting is so translatable. I kind of think they should
Well, the
be.
shooting.
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. I was going to add the shooting, and I've watched a lot of their film, and the reason I'm so high on Brandon Miller is because when I watch his high school film, I see a guy that played a totally different way than he played at Alabama. In high school, he did some stuff in the mid post. He shot mid range pull up jumpers, which is totally frowned upon against Alabama State. At Alabama. Well, he was basically a guy that only shot threes, and they didn't really put him in a lot of situations as, a pick and roll ball handler, which I think he has all of that with his size. And so I think in the NBA, when a team has, so much invested in him, I think you are going to see him, used as like a mid-range pull-up shooter, a three-point shooter, someone that if teams switch, he's able to post up smaller guards, or you may see him do some 3-5 ball screens and pick and rolls. And so I think that I'm very high on Miller. I'm probably higher on him than the consensus, because I think that so much of his game was stripped down to fit in Alabama's offense, and he still was the best player in college basketball, and he still had a phenomenal year. While I think at the guys that played for overtime, they got to do whatever they wanted to do, simply because it's totally in overtime's best interest to give the Thompson twins total freedom. I mean, they even put them on the same team. So, Amin is like definitely like more athletic, but I think that he has much bigger like weaknesses. And to me, I think that if you're a great passer, I think you become a more dangerous passer when you are like a big time scorer. So I look at like James Harden. I mean, this is a Rockets-based podcast. If you take James Harden's three-point shooting away, then it kind of strips away at how great of a passer he is. Because, I mean, now you kind of have to pick your poison with James Harden. Do you go under the screen? Right. And then if you try to, make sure that he can't get the three-point look, then once he gets in the paint, I mean, he's making skip passes. I mean, he's just a phenomenal passer. And so I think with Amin, he's going to have to really, really have to develop into a shooter to maximize his passing.
Right. I do think it's encouraging that he seems to be a pretty good at rim finisher. Right. I think that will help him. But you're right. Like, it's not. Shooting is not like a bankable, like, oh, everybody's definitely going to improve. Like, this is not, like, that's a misconception to me with player development. Like, people always, like, project guys to become better shooters, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. Often that doesn't happen. Yep. It's a very hard thing to learn. It's hard to break your old habits with your shooting form. It's hard to, like, teach new ones, especially when you get back into a game setting, like, and you're going back to the old. It's hard. It's hard to learn. Mm-hmm. So I agree. I think it's going to be, he's a project pick, but I to me, particularly for this Rockets team, and we can get into the Rockets in a second. That's why I would pick a player like that, because the Rockets, in my opinion, they need an engine. There's a possibility that they have that engine, like you talked about, and they just haven't been using him in Alperen Sengun, but there's also the possibility that Sengun tops out at someone that isn't, a mini Jokic, right? As disappointing as that would be, that's Jokic is, He's on his way. He's at the NBA Finals, right? Like he led a team to
Mm-hmm.
finals. That's a pretty high bar. But um, so if they don't have that guy, Amen makes a lot of sense as someone to like kind of develop in the background, especially if you go out and get James Harden. You can get Harden to be your engine while Amen is in the background kind of developing. That's kind of the way I see it. But there's also the idea that, hey, put all your eggs into Alperen Sengun, take Miller, and then, you know, build around Sengun, right? And you don't have to worry about, you know, Harden coming in and ruining something. I kind of feel like there's multiple arguments to be had, but I also think like it's out of Houston's hands, so there's no point in debating it, right? Because it's like they're at
Yeah.
number 4, so they're gonna take whoever's left over anyways.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Şengün's numbers compared to Jokic's numbers the first 2 years,
Yeah.
they're actually they're pretty similar. And I'll be honest, I lived in Turkey, and I've been watching Şengün since he played at the under-18s. So I may have a little bit of bias in a sense that I think that he can be a little like Jokic. May not be like a, you know, two-time, should have been three-time MVP, but I think he can be, you know, perennial all-star and one of the best fives in the game. But, you know, from a job security standpoint, you know, Rafael Stone probably doesn't have the job security to say, I'm not going to I'm going to pass on, you know, Thompson. I'm just going to totally build around Şengün. I mean, like even Denver had to like slowly, after like multiple years, decide like, okay, Jokic is our guy. Now he was a second round pick, so I mean that makes it a little bit harder. But I do think that for Şengün to like totally get the keys is gonna have to take some, you know, Rockets fans don't want to hear this, some years of failure with other guards for them to say, okay, you know what, Şengün is our guy. We need to make him the centerpiece and build around him.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. And you know, like if he doesn't end up being Jokic, I still think he's gonna be a starting level 5. Like that to me, that conversation's over. Like he's gonna be a starter. Really depends on what level of starter he's gonna be. I kind of look at a guy like excuse me, I'm forgetting the name, center in Sacramento, as kind of a floor, right? Like so, as an achievable, yeah,
Sabonis,
Sabonis. Excuse me.
yeah,
Sabonis is,
that's an all
yeah,
star. That's an all star.
that's a reasonable goal to strive to be. I feel like he hasn't had the opportunity to go and get that. Now, some of this is on him, right? Like Jokic went out there and got it. He made everyone understand who he is, right? So Alperen has to do some of that and really take the mantle for
Yeah.
himself. So
It's hard because I mean I think the team they handed the keys to Jalen Green right away, even
right,
though they're in the same draft class. So that could, I mean, I could see how that could be a fight because Jalen Green was the guy. I mean, the personality from the suit that he wore on draft day, the athleticism. People are going to be way more excited about athleticism and dunks as opposed to like a ground-bound center that has excellent footwork and touch and can pass. So I think he, in that regard, it may be a little bit more difficult than Jokic, even though Jokic was like a second-round pick, because you know, it just seems like the Rockets, their focus has been on Jalen Green as the next James Harden, which if Harden comes back, that makes things even more interesting going forward.
where do you stand on that conversation? As a quick detour, like, do you think that's a good idea?
I get it from, and I'm a big Harden fan. I'm a really big James Harden fan. I've been like a James Harden apologist for years. And so, on
It's
one
hard,
hand, I
right?
get it for
It's hard
Houston.
on the soul, right? To be that guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Especially when there's times where you're like, you know, I can't defend it
yeah,
anymore. On one hand, I think that the Rockets needed someone that can get guys easy looks. I think in order to maximize Jabari Smith, you need a guy like James Harden that is going to get him wide open looks. I think he is the table setter that Houston needs. On the other hand, I guess the Rockets don't have their picks next year, if I'm not mistaken. Are they? Is that part of the Westbrook Chris Paul trade or something
It's
like
top
that?
four protected, but that's not likely not going to happen. They're probably going to lose a pick. Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have a pick next year. So it's weird how now, I think Rafael Stone said don't judge the trade until, like 8 years down the line or something like
Yeah.
that. And so I think now Houston is in this weird position where they still want to develop guys, but they also want to at least start winning more and trending in the right direction. And it sounds like maybe they're not 100% confident that that can happen without adding James Harden. Is there a possibility that it stunts the growth of Sengun and Jalen Green? Yes, it does. What style of offense do they run? I mean, because to get the best of Harden, you have to run a James Harden offense that no matter who the coach is, it starts to look the same. I'm torn on it. I'm torn on it. Of course, I would like to see James win a championship or at least be in contention. And going back to Houston, does that sound like I've given up on the championship hope? I just want to go back to the city that I love, I want to feel comfortable with, and I want to be praised as the guy that got Houston back to the playoffs. I'm really, really torn on that.
So this is why last season felt like a really like I know they're getting a top 4 pick, and maybe that's what you take away from it. That's why last season felt like a lost season, right? Because they were so bad that we weren't able to get good intelligence on the roster, right? Like whether Alperen Sengun is that guy is one of the key pieces of intelligence that we could have gathered, and we could have started to build everything. Like they don't know that for sure, right? They're going in kind of blind, and that's why on draft night, there's not really a conversation at this point who they take at number 4. They're going to take whoever falls to them, even if that guy takes away from Sengun, because they don't know who Sengun is, right? And with Harden, the same thing. Like we don't know whether Harden will take away from Sengun because again, we don't know if Sengun is that guy. I think he can be that guy. I've consistently I watched a ton of him in the BSL. I know this guy is the real deal in my opinion, and I don't think he's as much of a liability defensively as people make him out to me. But I think he is a liability. And I.
But they're saying the same about Jokic in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Like Jokic is a liability, and
Jokic is like 4 inches taller though. To be fair,
you think he's really 4 inches taller?
I think Sengun is like 6'9", and Jokic is 7 flat. If I'm.
I mean, I think they got him listed at 6'11", and I mean this is just Wikipedia. 6'11" and 6'11". So
Okay.
that's what Wikipedia has him listed at. I could be wrong. I mean, like ESPN has Jokic at 6'11", and I don't know. I just never thought that there was that big of a difference. And ESPN has Sengun listed at 6'11" also.
Yeah, maybe it's maybe I don't know. It was just watching him on the floor, he doesn't look like a 6'11" guy.
Maybe it's the wingspan. Maybe
it's the wingspan. But that matters defensively, right? And it's easier for Jokic to make up for what he doesn't have foot speed wise, because he can use his arms like that. But I don't know. Like again, like I don't know because we didn't see anything last year. Like last season was so bad from a data standpoint that building out their team is going to be kind of like you're banking. You're going with your gut, like what you think is going to happen versus what you've seen. But we'll see. We'll see. This is where I end up. I think Sengun, in my opinion, if he's that guy, I don't think anything's going to stunt his growth. He'll be that guy no matter what. Like in my opinion, nothing was going to stop Jokic, right? Jokic was going to be Jokic wherever he went. It might have taken a longer time for people to figure that out, but I think I think he was going to be that guy. I hope we don't take a long time to figure it out because you might end up trading him, right? Like kind of like what the Thunder did with James Harden, right? They traded him before they found out he was that guy. And you don't want to do that with Sengun. That's the danger you run into. Trading the guy because you don't think he's the centerpiece.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that. I mean, I think the Thunder traded Harden just because they were being cheap, and that was just a financial decision. But again, I'm just, I'm biased towards Sengun, and although he may not be, like this athletic switchy center that you hope for, I think that even like the guys that are like these great centers or good centers, I mean, he's skilled enough to where I think his offense and what he provides on offense offsets what he may lack on the defensive end, because he can punish the smaller guy, and then if you send doubles, he can find cutters and so on. So, like I said, I think it's going to take some failure for the Rockets or any team to say, all right, Sengun is our guy. But you made up a good point that last season was kind of like a lost season because there was so much stuff going on, which I think kind of makes the Harden talk louder in a sense, because you figure out the team needs a veteran table setter, and if a guy like James wants to come back, then on one hand you sound foolish if you're like, no, we don't want to bring the guy that the city loves so much back. So Houston's in an interesting predicament.
Well, this is kind of what I think. I think, and I described him this way on the last podcast. I think the Rockets roster is like a blurry chalkboard, and James Harden's like a pair of glasses, right? That helps you see what you need to see, right? Like, I think because it's so tough to evaluate the talent, because a good player like James Harden that sets the table for you helps you evaluate that talent. It's easier to evaluate talent when the team is better. It just is. Like, that's why teams that are good tend to get the most draft capital from trades from their players when they trade off players, right? And I kind of think that's kind of what Houston needs. They need someone like James to help us figure out what's under the hood here. Now, the financial conversation, I think that's a little bit more nuanced. I personally would not let finances get in the way, but I do understand people who are hesitant to give him a 4-year max. It is. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to offshoot our draft conversation, but it is. I feel like everything the Rockets do this summer is interconnected, including what they do at the draft.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I wanted to ask you. So, if Houston has a commitment for James Harden, does that mean you try to move up to get Brandon Miller? Because I think if you get James Harden, then you're trying to win now. And Brandon Miller gives you a guy that, at the very minimum, you have the floor spacing. I mean, obviously he's going to have to shoot well, but at the very minimum, you have your floor spacing with Jabari Smith and Brandon Miller to open the lanes for Harden and Jalen Green and for Sengun to have one-on-one. So I think that you can't talk about the Rockets draft without mentioning the possibility of James Harden coming back. Because if Harden's not coming, then you go with, you probably stay put, or maybe you try to move up to get Scoot, but you take, who's available, whether it's Scoot, Amen, or Brandon Miller. But if Harden's coming, then I think that just changes your focus, and you need to get Brandon Miller.
So it might change their focus. I don't think it should. Right? Even if they knew for certainty that they are getting Harden, if they think that the player they're getting has superstar potential, right, at number 4 or whatever, right, the player that's going to land to them, right, whoever that player may be, you can't let a potential fit issue with Harden get in the way of drafting him, right? I don't think that's the right way to go about the draft. I think that's kind of why I think it's wild that Charlotte is considering anything other than Scoot Henderson. Even the only way I think that's a defensible position is if they truly think Brandon Miller is the second best prospect in this draft. If they think that he's the number 2 prospect in this draft, take him, right? Take him. Yeah. But if there's any part of them that's taking this for the wrong reasons, right? They're taking Miller. If the reporting seems to be true, if they do indeed take Miller because they think it's an easier fit with LaMelo Ball, I think that is reprehensible. I think they got to go with BPA, particularly if they think BPA could be a superstar, excuse me.
But you still need to make sure both guys are willing to buy into splitting the load. So even if you take the best player available, but both guys feel like, they should be the one, and then you end up probably going to have to choose between the two anyway. So
Well, then you can trade him, right? And that player will have more value,
yeah.
right?
Will they have more value than they would on draft day? So,
Well, then maybe you trade him on draft day. Maybe that's what you do. Maybe you trade down, right? Like, yeah,
yeah.
maybe I think that's probably the move. I think either you pick the guy or you trade the pick. I don't think there's a defensible position of not taking the possible BPA if there's a difference, right, in your mind. If there isn't a difference, like if they're very close in talent, I understand taking the better fitting guy. But if there's if that difference does exist, I don't understand it. So we'll see. We'll see what they do. A couple other questions. Let's talk about what actually will happen on draft night, because we've been kind of talking around it. We talked about picks 2 through 4 are on the table to some varying degrees. I suspect Charlotte will keep their pick, but you've reported that they've talked about trading down. And a ton of people reported Portland's interest in trading the pick to build a competitive team around Damian Lillard, including Portland themselves before the draft. Now, they may just trade the pick because they don't want to be in the position where they take a player that plays the same position as Damian Lillard. And also, Houston is sitting there at an interesting position at 4, because on one end, you could easily see them being aggressive and try trading up for someone like Scoot Henderson, like you mentioned before. But on the other end, there is a team that is this is a team that's hell bent on acquiring Harden this summer. So it's possible they trade out and go after someone, that makes them more competitive, as you talked about. I suspect not, but again, I have no idea what they have cooking. And that's partially what I want to ask you. Of these 3 teams, which team is most likely to trade their pick, and how aggressive do you think Houston will be in trading their pick?
That's a good question. I mean, I've heard that Charlotte is possibly interested in moving down. And for Charlotte, maybe if it's Orlando, you can get somebody 6 and 11. I've heard that Indiana is looking to make some trades, and they have their eyes on Brandon Miller also. I mean, because if you look at the Pacers, they need some help on the wings. I don't know. I mean, Portland. I think if Brandon Miller is available at number 3, I think Portland should absolutely take him. I think that Portland's it's not the same situation as the Rockets, but who are they going to get at number 3 that's going to automatically turn them into a contender in a sense?
Yeah.
Unless Harden says, I'm coming to Houston, and Embiid is like, oh, I don't have a shot anymore in the East. So, number 3 and whoever for Embiid, to me, that's the only thing that I feel like at number 3 you're going to get that could possibly turn Portland into a contender. If it's Siakam, is that enough to guarantee that they are, to go to the conference finals or be a top 3 seed? I don't think so. So if I'm Portland, I'd take Brandon Miller. Charlotte, I think Charlotte could possibly move out. And the reason I say I would think Charlotte number 1, and this is just me talking. If they feel like LaMelo and Scoot can't coexist, not from on the court, but just from a standpoint of, who's the alpha. And if they feel like we already are in a PR situation bringing Miles Bridges back, and then with this stuff going on with Brandon Miller, and it is the South, it is like the Bible Belt in a sense.
Yeah.
So having those two together they just may feel like it's not worth the PR, because between James Bouknight and the coach quitting last year before he even signed the contract, and then Michael Jordan's trying to sell the team. I wonder if Charlotte is kind of like, we want as much positive PR as possible. So I think that's something to factor. Again, this is just my opinion on it. So I think Charlotte would probably be the team that would be most likely to move
I
down.
hadn't considered the idea that may play a factor in Brandon Miller's draft. I mean, it really felt like it died down for a minute, but as you you know kind of pointed out, like once we get to draft time, these guys become more into focus, right? Everything about them becomes more into focus, including the incident with Brandon Miller, which he reportedly isn't even allowed to talk about, right? Um,
Yeah, yep.
yeah, which is kind of tough when you're doing an interview and the number one question that everybody wants to ask you, you kind of have to give a canned answer to. It's kind of tough, but
Yep.
um, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't factored that in. If Charlotte's on the table, if number two is on the table, what do you think it takes? Like, do you think they trade down? Do you think they trade out? Like, what's their strategy there?
You maybe trade down. I mean, I like Mark Williams there, but I think Orlando would have some interest in Scoot. And even though Orlando, I mean, they got a lot of redundancy there, and some of the position where they have a lot of redundancy is at the point
Yeah,
guard.
Suggs,
Um,
Fultz. Who's my guy coming off the bench?
Cole
Cole
Anthony,
Anthony. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know. I think draft night is going to be wild. I think it's going to be one of those nights where we can sit here and make these predictions or assume what's going to happen. It could be just team literally just come out of nowhere and move up into the top five.
But it really does feel like 2 through 4 is on the table in a way it hasn't felt like in a few years, right? Like these teams are
Yes.
seriously considering trading. I would also put Detroit as like a wild card here. I think there's a possibility they really push their chips onto the middle of the table because they're at fifth, and if these four guys don't drop out, which it's possible one of these four guys drops out. You may be more aggressive to try and move into that top four. And how much more aggressive is really the question. What are you willing to trade? I think Troy Weaver is a wild card, and I trying to predict what he's going to do is a fool's errand.
Yeah, and for me, like again, I think it's weird. If free agency was before the draft, I think it would shape how the draft looks. And to me, Houston, again, going back to the Harden situation, I'm personally not a fan of if you get Harden selecting Amin Thompson. I think you absolutely minimize what Amin does best, unless you're willing to bring him off the bench. But then if you keep Kevin Porter Jr., are you having KPJ and Amin Thompson together in the backcourt? And to me, when Amin is off the ball, unless he is like going to be used as a cutter, then I think his lack of shooting is going to make it difficult for everyone else on the floor. Especially if Houston is, let's say Houston does get to like the play-in or whatever, which with James Harden on the roster, I think it's totally possible. Amin might become unplayable in like a playoff series in a sense with his lack of shooting. And I think it's such a big upside and a big learning curve from him because he's going from, I mean, it's a big learning curve for everybody. But I think he's literally going from high school to the NBA
Right.
in a sense. And adding Harden signals we're trying to win. Yeah, we want to develop, but we're trying to win. I think if I'm Houston, if I have Amin Thompson, it is the long game in mind. He needs as many minutes to develop and so on and play. And I think that's when you get the best out of him. I would hate to like minimize a guy that I took number 4 and not put him in the best position to succeed because even though Harden shared the ball with Maxey, but Maxey's a guy that it was quick. You know what I mean? He didn't waste any dribbles. He got the ball, 1-2 dribbles, got to the lane, floater, shoot. And I already think Harden and Jalen Green is going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. And so adding Amin to me makes it, I just don't think that's the best fit. That's just my opinion.
I think because I think I view Amin as a project high upside kind of guy. That's why I'm willing to take him regardless, right? But you're right in that they do have a bit of a logjam there, especially with KPJ. And that's kind of why I think Houston of these four teams is more likely to make a trade period. Not necessarily trading
Mm-hmm.
their fourth pick, but making a trade period this summer because they have so many question marks they need to solve. In regards to their roster, the composition of the roster is kind of different, and they've kind of been taking BPA, whatever their estimation of BPA every single year, and that's kind of led to these
Mm-hmm.
weird fits, and they're going to have to solve some of it this summer,
Yep.
especially if they get James Harden. You got more fit issues to solve. So I would
Yep.
say KPJ is someone I don't think you should plan your roster around, right? But you do have to kind of factor in the environment for Amen that he's landing in. I would agree.
Yeah. And even with KPJ, I mean, his I think his contract, I don't know if it makes him harder to trade or easier to trade. I can't figure that out simply because he has a June, I don't know, maybe like June 30th guarantee date, but after that, the rest of the years aren't guaranteed. So if you're a team, do you, I don't know if it's a player, does he have, I don't know. I think it's a team option after every
Mm-hmm.
year. I wonder how much value does he have, considering the fact that, I mean, um, there may be some concerns about just overall maturity and all that. So I wonder how much value does he bring. I don't think that you'll get fair value for his talent and production by trading him.
I I'm with you, man. Like it really does feel like he's. I think he's super talented because of everything that surrounds him and what people his perception, his league wide perception.
Yep.
They're not. They may be forced. They may be in a position where they're forced to make a trade, and they have to accept a lower package for him. And maybe maybe if you're Houston, you're just happy taking that because you traded nothing for him. Literally nothing of
Yep.
substance to get him.
Pack of Skittles and a 7 Up is what I remember he got traded
Yeah,
for.
yeah. So maybe you're okay with that because anything you get at that point is
Yeah.
positive. But at the same time, you also kind of want to like take. There's the opportunity cost of like if you're not trading him for what his fair market value is, it sucks. You want to try and get as much as possible for him. I think it's possible. It's very possible that they go into the season with him. But I think it's also very possible that they don't end the season with him.
Yep.
It's tough. It's going to be tough. And how he reacts to a James Harden signing is going to be interesting. We saw how Jalen Green seemed to react on that Paul George podcast.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how KPJ reacts. I think Jalen Green's role is not really at risk. KPJ's is
Right.
really what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. All right. So I think the $1 million question, and we kind of talked around it, right? But I'm going to ask you directly: what the hell is Charlotte going to do at number 2? Because it's going to literally impact everything for the Rockets.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, I want to say they take Brandon Miller, but on the other hand, like the situation I brought up, if Miles Bridges is coming back and then they bring in Brandon Miller, I just wonder, do they want to deal with the potential PR storm that comes with that, especially from like a women's perspective, right? But that's something that they may say, you know what, I don't know, talent wise, we're willing to do this. The Scoot and LaMelo situation, like I said, they may be able to coexist on the court, but for some reason, and this is just my personal opinion, I think Melo would have a hard time coming off the ball and splitting duties. And I think part of the danger sometimes with the NBA and the way they market players is you market this young guy as like, and I think it's kind of the same in Houston. You market this young guy. This is the new face of the franchise. This is the guy that's gonna turn things around. And you kind of spoil these kids at 19 years old, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, we're bringing in somebody that plays the same position of you. We need you to scale back a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think for a kid, that's tough. I think of like Marbury and Garnett in the situation. Even though they play totally different positions, the ego of Marbury was like, I want my own
Right.
team. I deserve my own team. I don't want to be in. And I'm sure like 30-year-old Stephon Marbury would look at 21-year-old Stephon Marbury and be like, you were stupid. You had a chance to play with a Hall of Famer. And so I wonder, is that like a similar situation that could happen? Because again, the media has labeled Scoot as a generational guy, a guy that was going to be number one in any other draft, which I kind of disagree with. I don't think he would have went number one over Cade or Zion or even Ayton, just because of the ties with Robert Sarver in Arizona and so on and so on. But it's like you're telling the guy you're generational, you're the best player in any other draft. Says, oh well, we need you to split and play off the ball some in Charlotte because you're sharing the duties with another All-Star, or vice versa. So I think unless I just think like the ego part of guys being so young, I think that what makes the Scoot and LaMelo kind of tough to pair together. And that's just that's just my opinion. I don't know either guy personally at
Yeah,
all.
life can come at you fast. Like I remember 2014 or 2015, whatever year Jabari was drafted. It was like, okay, like they finally got their guy. The Bucks finally have their guy. All these pieces, Chris Middleton, this Giannis guy, they're nice, but they needed the centerpiece, and they finally got it. And it turns out, no, Giannis was the centerpiece all along, and Jabari is not relevant to the conversation, right? It's
And
yeah,
the perception is that, I mean, of course Jabari has some injuries, but the perception is he struggled with. I mean, Milwaukee's close to his hometown, and he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at such a young age, and they were saying that he's arguably one of the best high school phenoms to come out of Chicago, a city with such a rich basketball history. Oh, you got to take a back seat to this Greek kid that, was playing in a gym with grainy footage a couple years ago. And from what I've heard, that was hard for him to accept.
yeah. I mean, and then you had the injuries. I mean, the injury was killer. I mean, it really felt like he was starting to find his footing before that ACL tear, and then bam, like again, it just comes at you so fast in the NBA. But yeah, I agree. It's a difficult balancing act, especially when you market it the way that you do, right? And it kind of relates to the Jalen Alperen conversation we were having earlier, right? Like you made Jalen believe that he's the guy, right? And if Alperen becomes the guy, is he gonna be okay with that? Is he gonna be okay becoming the second guy? Which I think, in my opinion, I think Jalen's okay with it. That's just me. I suspect he'd be fine with it because we've seen what he did in the G League off the ball. Right, he was really, really talented at playing without the basketball, and he apparently told the coaching staff after the season, or during the season, excuse me, that he wanted to play more off ball and this on ball stuff, like he wanted to do less of it. And that really, like, people took that as like a negative thing. Oh, this is the inmates running the asylum. Like, no, that's like actually a really mature thing for him to say, that I want to play more off the ball, you know?
It is, but I also look at like, to me, like the best scorers in the NBA are guys that can score and they're playmakers. And so, in my opinion, in order for Jalen Green to like really maximize this crazy God-given talent that he has, that he's going to have to play more on the ball and become like this playmaker passer that makes teams struggle to defend him. And so I look at, how Harden was. You look at Luka is a great passer. I mean, you look at Giannis, and I mean, Tatum made his leaps as when he developed as a passer. Unless, you say, maybe Jalen could be like a more athletic, like Devin Booker, even though Devin plays off the ball. But I think Devin gets about 4 or 5 assists per game. And so part of my questions with the Rockets is, and I know like the KPJ situation makes things difficult, but if I were like running the Rockets, right, and I knew I had these years of Jalen Green that were going to be bad, I think I would have put him at like the point in the situation and just learn how to make plays for others. Yeah, we're going to be bad in a sense, but you're learning on the fly how to make all these right reads and so on. And then but maybe by 24, now you're like the primary, and all we have to do is just put the pieces around you. So, again, very interesting fit. That quick question, like, how often did Houston run like Jalen Green and Jabari pick and rolls? I think that has the potential to be like a lethal pick and roll combination.
Jalen and Jabari, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, they didn't run much of it, but
Yeah.
they
Pick and pop.
right, yeah, they ran a little bit of it, right? But for the most part, it was a lot of isolation. I mean, to be honest, like, last
Yeah.
year it was a tough year to watch the Rockets, and a lot of it was because it was their offensive identity. Like, I'm not going to say they didn't have sets, right? They ran plays, but it was a lot of like your turn, my turn, watching the offense, and it was very clear that there wasn't a structure set put in place, and that's kind of what I'm excited for Ime. I'm excited for him to actually implement a structure, and he talked about actually, and this will make you pretty excited. He did a Q&A with Jonathan Fig in the Houston Chronicle, and he talked about Alperen Sengun becoming more part of the offense, and and Jalen becoming kind of more off the ball. I'm like, yeah, yes, yes, of course, yes, that is a no brainer. Like, it is ridiculous that when Kevin Porter Jr. went down, Alperen Sengun's usage rating was exactly the same. The only thing that changed was his minutes per game. Like, his usage did not change. And that to me was astonishing. And that to me showed like the lack of confidence that Silas and that coaching staff had in Sengun. And I'm happy that this coaching staff, at least going in, seems to have a little bit more. And I'm really excited to see just more of it. Like, I couldn't believe that they weren't staggering with Sengun. Like, they weren't like letting him run bench units, you know?
And it was crazy is I think KPJ's injury helped the new coaching staff.
Yeah.
Because now they have a sample size and the blueprint of, this is what we can do. I still don't even know if he gets that opportunity if KPJ is healthy the whole year. Even if the former or the new coaching staff would have even seen that, because maybe you would have had to watch it in practice. But it's like I keep saying, very interesting what's going to happen in Houston next year.
I mean, they started the.
But I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the knocks that people had about Boston was it was your turn, my turn with Tatum and Brown, and I wonder how does Houston stop that? Because I think it can be your turn, my turn if Harden doesn't come, and I think it would definitely be your turn, my turn when Harden does come.
I think you stop that by running a system in which there's a lot of player movement, as opposed to running a system in which one guy controls everything, right? And that I think should happen if Harden comes or if he doesn't come. I think Harden needs to finally go back to his OKC roots a little bit and play off the ball some, right? And be.
Do you think that's possible? Like, do you think you can convince Harden, hey, come back to Houston? Oh, yeah. You're going on a team that only won, what they win, like 18 games last year? Oh, yeah, and we need you to play off the ball more. You can't be the James Harden that you were.
Or at the very.
I think that's going to tough.
Or at the very least, age into that, right? Like, be what Manu was on the Spurs, right? Like, not necessarily, maybe not come off the bench, right? But like become that guy who you're a complementary piece to this puzzle, right? And I think once he hits his, if they sign him to a 4-year max, once he's hitting his 35, his age 36 season, it's hard not to be the complementary piece, right? Unless you're LeBron and you're aging like, unlike anything we've ever seen, which I don't suspect that's going to happen with James. So I think that's kind of where Ime comes in. He has to do the sell job, and whether or not he responds to that, we'll see. We'll see how Harden responds to that role. I think we saw a lot of that in Brooklyn before things kind of fell apart there, right? I thought we saw his willingness to play that. I don't have to be James. Some of that in Brooklyn. And it's unfortunate we never got to see the final formation of that team because I thought we would have saw a very different James Harden for a consistent stretch. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think it helps if Alperen establishes himself, because then
Yep.
it's not a choice anymore. Then it's like you have to work around what this guy is. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the key to that, like you said, is more off-ball movement. Is you have to find the off-ball movement players to fit that style. I think it's hard to convince guys that are isolation heavy or guys that are used to playing with the ball in their hands to all of a sudden, hey, we need you to be these great cutters. So I think you need to find like these Bruce Browns or these guys that are just really, really good cutters. And there's some guys in the draft that I think like could fit that role as being like good cutters that Houston could take a look at. And
Some guys on the roster, right? Like Tari Eason,
yeah,
Jalen Green, KJ Martin is a fantastic cutter,
yeah,
right? Like
yep, that's
like
true.
I like there's a way to make this work. You gotta put that structure in, right? And I
Yep,
can't like I hope that happens. I know they're gonna be more structured defensively. I know that's gonna happen because that's what Ime was known for, right? To see some structure implemented offensively is what I'm really fascinated to see. I'm I think
yep,
they should try playing some, at least at the very least next year, run some bench units with Sengun running everything, right? Make him the focal point of a bench offense. Make him prove it to you if you don't believe it, right? Like, give him
yep.
that opportunity. And then you'll see, in my opinion, the fruits of that labor bear out in a fantastic prospect that you can build around. Okay, let's talk about number 20 because I'm having a tough time figuring out if anybody's going to drop out of this lottery. I like a lot of these guys. I like Derek Lively. I like excuse me, Keontae George. I don't think these guys are going to fall to where Houston is at 20, but the idea excites me. And is it at all possible that someone falls to where Houston is at 20?
Yeah. I mean, I think this draft is fluid from 15 through, I mean, really, you could say 14 through 25, and then maybe even 26 through 35. There are going to be some surprises. I mean, you got a guy like Olivier Maxence Prosper, who's going to shake the draft up. He's, I think, going to end up being a first-round pick now, which means somebody falls out. You got Bilal Coulibaly, which is Victor Wembanyama's teammate in France. I think he's rising, so somebody's going to fall with those two. I mean, somebody that could possibly fall in that range, maybe Jordan Hawkins. I think his range is anywhere from 14 through 20. I mean, he would provide like shooting. Bryce Sensabaugh, who has a unique style, but I think at the minimum, he can play a role as a floor spacer. 6'6", 235, but he shot 40% from three. Jet Howard is another guy that could fall in that range. And then if you're looking for like, center, I think Lively's pro day takes him out of range for 20. And I have been saying for a few weeks now that I think it would just make sense for Dallas to take him. And I had even tweeted when I was at the combine that just so happened to be in the gym while Clutch was. I mean, they weren't. I mean, they were just working out, and they came in like 11 o'clock at night. And the only reason I was in there is because I was just taking advantage of the Wi-Fi to upload my podcast. And I saw Lively knocking down corner threes after corner threes. And when I tweeted it, I didn't realize it, but I guess people thought I was like, kind of like being paid by Clutch,
Oh,
or I was planted
right.
there by Clutch to make those comments to help Lively stock. I didn't realize it till people told me. And then Lively went out and hit I think I saw you like 14 corner threes in a row in this pro day. So, I mean, I wasn't lying. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. So, I think he's out of that range. But somebody that can be in that range that I think could really help is Noah Clowney from Alabama. He's 6'10". I think he'll provide defense. He'll give you some size. And then he's also has some shooting upside, but he's young. He's only 18 years old, and he'll be 18 on draft day. And I think he fits the timeline of what Houston has going. Well, the timeline before the Harden situation. I think the timeline kind of changes, but he's someone that I think could help. And then it's maybe not the sexiest pick, and it could be a little bit of redundancy with Eason, but Chris Murray. I think Chris Murray is someone that is ready to come in and contribute and play right away. Doesn't have like the greatest upside because he'll be 23 once the season starts. But if he's 75% of Keegan Murray, that's a win.
That's asking a lot, but I hear what you're saying. It is.
Well, he averaged 20 and 8 this year.
Yeah,
28, two
very good.
assists, a block, a steal. And I just think like that 1 year difference of, oh man, he's going to be 23 once the season starts. I think some teams are like, we don't want him. But I look at it another way. If he's 23 once the season starts and he signs a 4-year deal, if you're Houston or any other team, you're getting Chris Murray in his prime on a rookie deal.
Right.
That doesn't happen often. So I think there is a positive in that. But what would you say like Houston's greatest need is outside of like a table setter?
Outside the table.
Is it just wing depth?
I think they have a lot of wing depth. I would say, if you're just asking,
Or like wing depth as a shooter, shooting wing
is
depth.
definitely. I would say if you were to like after passing, I would say shooting is definitely the biggest need for this team. They have a bunch of guys who could potentially become good shooters. Like I'm confident that Jalen can become a good shooter. KPJ has become a good shooter. But there are a lot of guys on this roster. Including Jabari Smith, he has not proven yet that he's going to become like this 40% guy. I think he will become closer to that this season. But that his rookie year. His rookie year was kind of a yellow flag to me. Like it really was. Like it wasn't like I'm not full blown like panicking about it, but it definitely gave me a little bit of pause in terms of like, oh, this guy's definitely going to become this knockdown guy. Just because, he was taking a lot of volume. It's not like this; he wasn't taking threes. I think, if I were to say what went wrong there, I think the NBA three was a little bit too far for him. Just to start off, like I think, if you watch it, you obviously saw it. His progression from high school to college in terms of the range was pretty significant. Taking a bunch of mid-range jumpers in high school, then he got to college and he extended out to 3. And when you get to the NBA, that's like another 2 or 3 feet back, and he likes taking his threes at the top of the key, which is the farthest you are from the basket.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I think some more stretching out to the corners and some more player movement will help his percentages. But I'm not sure if they're going to be able to encourage him to do that. So we'll see. That's worry for me.
I honestly wasn't the highest on Jabari. I thought he struggled creating his own shot, and my theory is if I'm going to take a guy number 1, and when people thought he was number 1, if I'm going to take a guy number 1, I want that guy to be someone who at the end of the shot clock I can give the ball to and say, everybody get out the way. At the end of the game, hey, we need a bucket, go get us one. I always saw Jabari as a complimentary player, and maybe like a pick and pop guy. Even now, I don't really see him as a guy that can attack closeouts. And he's super young, so he can develop into that. But I still have a hard time envisioning him as someone that can really attack hard closeouts and make guys pay. But I do think that James Harden will be able to get the best out of Jabari because, Harden loves throwing that hook pass for a pick and pop guy. And so I think Harden does help Jabari's growth there. I'll say that Harden will also give him the confidence in his shot. I think part of his struggles last year was, like you said, it was your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. And for a guy that was the number 3 pick, you can make a case and say he wasn't really the focal point in a sense like other number 3 picks would have been. And so if I'm Jabari Smith, I want James Harden more than anybody this summer.
No,
I'm praying for
I would
Harden.
agree. He is the guy who stands to benefit the most from a James Harden acquisition.
Most, yep.
And listen, like the age is like what gives you the pause, right? Like he came in super young, and you can say He's entering next season in as a 19-year-old. So like you
Yep.
can have that confidence in being like, okay, he has room to grow. And he was the youngest of the three by a lot, right? Like he was 12 months younger than Chet and 6 months younger than Paolo,
Yeah.
right? So there's some room to there's some room to grow, but the concerns about the shot creation. I shared the same thing with you. I was like, if you're gonna pick him at number one, he has to be able to get me a bucket or create for others,
Yeah.
right? Ideally both,
Yep.
and never showed that really to a high degree. I mean, he did create some, but at the NBA level, he's not going to be that guy, right? And I think it's not reasonable to build your team with him becoming that guy. I think it's more reasonable to build with him becoming someone who is catching the ball and shooting it as or
Yep.
taking a dribble or two. I think, and I think there's reason to believe that he can become like a LaMarcus Aldridge type, right? Like I liked
Yep.
I loved the LaMarcus Aldridge comparison. I think that to me is like some like if he next season increases his load of mid range jumpers, I think we're actually going to see a spike in his efficiency because I think his confidence goes up when he's draining those mid range jumpers. Then he extends out to three, then he really starts hitting the threes. I think that to me
Yeah.
would help.
It's a different era. That's the part that concerns me a little bit, where the analytics, may not favor the pick and pop mid range like it did when LaMarcus was there, and so that's the part that's a little concerning to me. But overall, I mean, he shot 33% on jumpers overall, and I mean that's also pretty concerning. But it was like 36% and 40% inside of 17 feet. So I do think the mid range is good. But do you think Ime is going to allow that?
I think Ime more than anyone would understand that. Like as a former player, like he probably understands the idea of gaining confidence from another area of the floor to feed another area of the floor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
I mean, I don't know. It's good. That's what I'm saying. Like we're really gonna see what Ime's offensive chops are next year. He again for as highly coveted as he was, um, we haven't really seen an extended stretch with him as an offensive coordinator, right? Like what he can do X and O's wise with the Rockets is going to be really fascinating to me. Um, and obviously incorporating someone like James Harden, should James Harden come, would be would add another layer to that. But
Yep.
what, let's end on this. When you look at Houston's core, how confident are you in what they're building? Because I think a lot of these guys are super talented and they've been able to find talent at areas of the draft and sometimes areas of free agency where other teams haven't been, right? Like they found they found KJ Martin at the 52nd pick. They bought it. They bought that pick. They found excuse me, Jay Sean Tate in free agency, right? Like
Yep.
they have an ability to find guys late in the draft. Sengun at 16, obviously the biggest one. But at the way this talent, all the talents fitting together, hasn't yet come to par yet, right? So how have you evaluated what they've done?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the talent and the collection of talent, I mean, they've done a good job. I mean, I think Usman Garuba is good, even though I think he's the guy that's going to look his best on his second team.
Maybe, yeah,
It is probably
yeah.
he's a guy that I feel like, and I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and I understand like the European prospects and how they play. Garuba is a guy that I feel like going to a team like Houston is the absolute worst for him because he only knows how to play basketball. He doesn't know how to hoop, if that makes sense. And I think like for those that don't know, when I say that, like Garuba is a guy that is used to playing in structure. He grew up in the Real Madrid system where everything is structured, there's ball movement and so on. And I think when you're on a bad team in the NBA with young guys, you have to know how to go out and get yours. Because if you don't, you may make the right play and the right pass, and you may not get it. And so even with like Sengun, I felt like even watching him in summer league, there were times where he was like, "All right, I'm only going to score unless I go out and get it myself." So you started seeing him like get the rebound and push it himself, and so on. And so with Garuba, he doesn't have that in his game. And so maybe a guy like Harden helps Garuba also. That's something that we haven't really talked about. Somebody that's going to be able to get, points at the dunker and so on. So I
Maybe a
think
guy like
Garuba's
Harden
good.
changes Garuba's role on the team completely, right? Like, yeah, like right
Yeah.
now we're talking about him as like a backup center. Maybe Garuba's more.
He's only
Yeah,
6'8".
maybe
Yeah.
Garuba's more.
He was a good
Yeah.
passer. Like he was a good passer at Real Madrid, and that's one of the things that he does. So I don't know if he's an NBA starter, but I do think in a reduced role on a good team, I think he has a spot as a connective guy. Josh Christopher is a guy that, I mean, Josh knows how to hoop. He knows how to go out and get a bucket. I think there's just a lot of redundant skill sets. And also, I mean, it's been talked about, at length, but I think having like that veteran, that leadership, someone that, just kind of basically keeps the young guys in check, I think that's been the biggest missing piece for Houston. I think if they could do it all over again, and I had a whole series of tweets about a few years back. A guy like Patrick Beverly, he would, if I had a young team like this in Houston, Patrick Beverly, PJ Tucker, and I guess these are all former Rockets.
Or John Wall. Like
Those
they had John Wall, right? Like
They had John Wall, and I think John still wanted to play. I think he still was trying to show that I'm still John
then let him
Wall,
play.
and
Let him
so
play. No.
yeah, I agree with that. But if you're just looking for that veteran that's gonna have like a reduced role but a big impact and set the tone, I would lean toward, and I like Jay Sean too. He has part of that, but he can't be it on his own. But I would lean towards those guys that had to fight and scratch and crawl their way to the NBA, that have stuck around and are playing past like 33, 34, like your PJs and your Patrick Beverleys, those guys that learn like, all right, I have to be extra professional to stick in the NBA, because those guys could have ended up right back in Europe if they weren't like above and beyond as a professional and had to find a niche as this defensive player. So those are the guys I would have had surround, these young guys as far as like veterans. But I said I have to say this. I like the talent they've collected. It's just a lot of redundant skill sets. And maybe, you can, I guess maybe package some of the talent that you've got for pieces that fit better around, Jalen and Sengun and Jabari.
Yeah.
But like I said, I like the talent. I think they've drafted well. And like some of the picks that they got late have been valuable.
Yeah, I particularly like Tari Eason as someone who I think is undervalued on the Rockets, but given a bigger role, and hopefully that happens next year. I think that guy is like the steal of last year's draft, potentially.
Oh yeah.
Like,
And I've been on record of saying that, and I get it how the NBA is, but in a totally fair training camp where there's no politics, kind of like in Europe where you need to win. There's
going.
no reward for losing. In Europe, hey, if you're bad, you don't get a lottery pick. You don't get a draft pick. You have to win. I think if Houston were in a situation where they just had to win every game, Tari Eason plays more minutes and he plays ahead of Jabari.
I knew it. I'm 100% with you. 100% with you. I said the same thing. I was like, this guy's better than him right now. Like he's just better than him. And we'll see what happens next year. We'll see if they put these positions up for grabs, which I think would be healthy actually for everybody involved, even Jabari, to just have to earn it, right, and earn that spot as your mantle on whatever this rebuild's going to be. Okay, we have to head out here in a second. Thank you so much for your time, Rafael. Please tell the people where they can find you on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever social media, and on Substack.
Yeah, you can find me at Barlowe500 on Twitter, and then I have a Substack. It's a subscription-based newsletter where I'm providing like my own draft takes and mock drafts and big boards, but also intel that I'm receiving from players and agents and even some teams. And then I have a podcast, Locked On NBA Big Boards, 5 days a week. So you're getting about 7 or 8 different forms of content from me, draft content from me throughout the week. So it's a lot, but I enjoy doing it. So I'm easy to find. Barlowe500 on Twitter, and then NBA Big Board newsletter and NBA Big Board podcast.
Please get some sleep for me this year. All right, I know that the 10-month-old doesn't. It makes things a little difficult, and I know you're kind of a world traveler, But please,
It's worse
we
now.
need you to be
It's
healthy
it's
next year.
it's worse
Yeah.
now. It's a lot worse now. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I'll figure it out somehow.
for sure. All right, I'll talk to you down the road, Rafael.
All right, man. Thanks again for having me on. Anytime you want me on, just let me know. We can make it happen.